Isaiah Stanton regretted everything the second he sat down at the tiny round table covered in a cheap white cloth and fake rose petals. He adjusted the cuff of his navy blazer, glanced at his Rolex, and sighed. Speed dating? He muttered under his breath. What the hell am I doing here? Across the room, bells chimed, signaling the start of the first round. A woman in a red dress plopped down in front of him, already talking before she even made eye contact. So, I was married once. But it was more of a paperwork thing. He needed a visa. Anyway, I love sushi and… Isaiah zoned out. He'd agreed to this ridiculous event on a dare from his younger brother, Luca, who swore it would be fun and humbling. Humbling. As if Isaiah hadn't built Stanton Technologies from the ground up. As if making his first million by 24 and his fifth by 27 meant he needed some lesson in humility. No, he didn't need humbling. He needed out. 12 women later, he was counting down the seconds to escape. Until she sat down. Her name tag read, Georgia Jameson. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun that somehow still looked perfect, and her eyes, he couldn't stop staring at those eyes. Bright, sharp, and amused as they locked on his. You look like you'd rather have a root canal, she said, setting her elbow on the table and resting her chin on her hand. Should I be offended? He blinked. No. I mean maybe a minor procedure. Not a full root canal. Her laugh was low and unforced. Wow. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. Isaiah cracked a smile. A real one. I'm Isaiah. She looked at his name tag and raised an eyebrow. I know. It's stuck to your chest. I'm Georgia. But you can call me G. G? He repeated, leaning forward slightly. What if I want to earn the full name? Then you'll have to do better than minor procedure jokes. Something about her tone made his chest tighten. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't performing. She was just herself. So, what do you do, G? He asked. I work at the public library. Children's section. Lots of glitter. Lots of screaming. Occasionally both at once. He blinked. Really? What? You don't think I look like someone who reads The Very Hungry Caterpillar 10 times a day? I think you look like the only sane person in this room. Her smile softened. Why are you here, Isaiah? He hesitated. The truth was, he'd gotten tired of being chased for his money, his name, his status. At events, women saw his last name before they saw his face. Dating had become a game of who could pretend to be chill while calculating their future prenup. I lost a bet, he said finally. She laughed again. I knew it. For the remaining 4 minutes, they didn't talk about careers or exes or favorite foods. They talked about childhood injuries, irrational fears, and the best pizza in the city. When the bell rang, he didn't want to move. Time's up, the host called. Georgia stood. Well, Isaiah, good luck with the rest of your dental procedures. He stood too fast. Wait, can I see you again? She tilted her head. Is that allowed? I thought the whole point was to wait for the matches. I don't care about protocol. Her eyes searched his. I don't know. Look. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a card, and scribbled his number. If you decide your glitter-covered library life needs a little chaos, call me. She took the card, biting her lip. You might be the chaos. He grinned. Then we're even. She walked away before he could say anything else. He watched her go, his heart beating faster than it had in years. Something about her stayed with him. The way she didn't try. The way she didn't care who he was or maybe didn't know. And for the first time in a long time, Isaiah Stanton wanted someone to see him. Just him. He didn't hear from her that week. Isaiah told himself it was fine. He had meetings, investor calls, and a product launch for his newest app. But by the 5th day, George's silence was driving him insane. Maybe she lost the card, Lucas said, kicking his feet up on Isaiah's penthouse couch. Or maybe she didn't care. Isaiah muttered, scrolling through his phone, not looking for her name but kind of hoping it would magically appear. You really like her, huh? Isaiah looked up. I don't know. I spent 5 minutes with her. You've never cared about a woman after 5 minutes. That was true. On day 6, he walked into the library. He wasn't sure what he was expecting, maybe her reading to a group of kids, maybe a magical glitter explosion. But instead, he found her kneeling behind the front desk, trying to unjam a printer. She looked up, surprised. Isaiah? I came for a story, he said. She stood up slowly. You actually came. Why didn't you call? Georgia wiped her hands on her skirt. I wasn't sure. You know. Suits and fancy watches. I'm stickers and macaroni art. I like macaroni art. She laughed, but it sounded nervous. You're serious? I'm not here for a fake smile or a status match. I'm here for you. She looked at him, long and hard. Okay then. Story time's at 4. You're helping. And just like that, he was on the floor, holding a sock puppet named Mr. Pickles, reading Green Eggs and Ham to 30 screaming toddlers while Georgia tried not to laugh in the corner. That evening, she took him to a hole-in-the-wall taco place that didn't take credit cards and served drinks in plastic cups. He paid in cash and tried every salsa on the table just to make her laugh. She did again and again. Later, as they walked down the street, she brushed her hand against his. He caught it, held it. You're not what I expected, she whispered. Neither are you. And for the first time in years, Isaiah didn't feel like a millionaire. He felt like a man who just met the one woman who could steal his heart. Isaiah didn't mean to cancel a board meeting for her, but when Georgia asked if he wanted to go to a community theater production of Peter Pan directed by a retired kindergarten teacher and starring a cast of children under 10, he didn't pause before saying yes. And now, sitting in a folding chair between parents waving camcorders and a toddler gnawing on a juice box straw, he found himself clapping as a 7-year-old Captain Hook forgot his line and Georgia leaned closer to whisper. This is the best part. He turned slightly toward her, catching the way her eyes lit up when the kids danced across the stage in mismatched costumes. She wasn't watching the show. She was watching them, cheering for every crooked bow and offbeat song. You come to these a lot? He asked, keeping his voice low. I used to help with costumes before budget cuts. Now I just show up and clap loud enough to make them believe they're Broadway bound. And you don't miss the glitter? I still sneak it in when no one's looking. He laughed softly, but something in her tone tugged at him. There was pride there, but also pain. He didn't ask about it, not yet. She wasn't the kind of woman you pressed. She was the kind you waited for. After the curtain call and a standing ovation that had less to do with talent and more to do with parental devotion, they walked out into the brisk evening air. You really canceled a meeting for this? She asked, glancing sideways at him. I rescheduled it, he corrected. Besides, I think I made the better investment. That's a bold strategy, betting on a pirate with stage fright. I was betting on you. That quieted her. For several steps, the only sound was the tap of her boots on the sidewalk. I haven't let anyone bet on me in a while, she finally said. Why not? She didn't look at him. Because the last time someone did, they cashed out early. He didn't ask what happened. She didn't offer. But the way her shoulders tensed told him it wasn't a story she told often or easily. They stopped at a corner, waiting for the light to change. A group of teenagers raced past them on skateboards, laughter echoing behind them. Isaiah glanced at her, at the way her hands were tucked into her coat, fingers curled like she was holding something invisible. Do you want to go somewhere? He asked. Somewhere. Different? Define different. Have you ever been to the observatory on Oakmont Hill? She blinked. That's members only. I'm a member. She tilted her head. Of course you are. I know a guy, he added, grinning slightly. You are the guy. He flagged down a black SUV idling at the curb. The driver stepped out and opened the door with a silent nod. Georgia hesitated. I'm not dressed for fancy. It's not fancy. It's quiet. And it has stars. Stars I can see from my fire escape. These ones come with hot chocolate. She bit her lip, then slid into the car. The ride was quiet, but not awkward. She leaned against the window, watching the city lights blur past, while Isaiah watched her reflection, wondering how someone so grounded could throw his world off balance so completely. When they arrived, the security guard at the gate waved them through without question. The observatory sat at the top of a hill, surrounded by tall pines and a halo of quiet. Inside, it smelled like cedarwood and old books, with a domed ceiling that opened into the sky. A private guide greeted them and handed Isaiah a thermos and 2 mugs before disappearing into the shadows. Georgia turned slowly in the center of the room. This place is beautiful. I come here when I need to remember I'm not the center of the universe. She looked up. That's surprisingly self-aware for someone who wears cufflinks to a taco stand. He handed her a mug. Careful, it's hot. She took it with both hands. What's in this? Swiss chocolate. Cinnamon. And a little bit of magic. She sipped, then made a quiet sound of approval. Okay, I'll allow it. They sat side by side beneath the telescope, the stars above them like scattered diamonds. He didn't try to touch her. He just sat close enough to feel the heat of her arm against his. I used to want to be an astronaut, she said after a while. Really? Until I found out I'd have to leave Earth for months at a time. I like gravity. And bookstores. What made you stay here? In this city? My dad. Her voice softened. He was a mechanic. Worked on old motorcycles. Taught me how to hold a wrench before I learned how to hold a pencil. He sounds like someone who knew what mattered. He did. He passed away 3 years ago. Isaiah's chest tightened. I'm sorry. She gave a small nod. He left me the house. And the habit of fixing things. Even when they're not broken. He turned to her. Is that what you're doing with me? Trying to fix something? No, she said, her gaze meeting his. You don't feel broken. You feel lost. He didn't know what to say to that. Because it was true. And she'd seen it without him saying a word. When they left, he walked her home. Her place was on the 2nd floor of a narrow brick building with ivy curling up the side. She paused at the bottom of the steps. I had fun tonight, she said. Me too. She looked up at him. You're different than I expected. Everyone thinks I'm going to be a headline. I think you might be a footnote, she said, smiling faintly. The part people miss but end up remembering. He stepped closer. Can I see you again? She hesitated, then reached out and touched his chest lightly, just over his heart. You already are. And then she turned and disappeared up the steps, leaving him standing in the glow of the porch light, wondering how a woman with glitter in her veins and ghosts in her eyes had managed to say everything without saying much at all. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he took a meeting while half listening, his mind drifting back to the sound of her laugh, the weight of her gaze. Luca noticed. You're useless today, he said, spinning a pen between his fingers. I'm fine. You're in love. Isaiah didn't answer. Luca leaned back. You've known her a week. I've known her long enough. Luca studied him. Does she know who you are? She knows I'm Isaiah. The rest doesn't matter. It will eventually. Isaiah looked out the window at the skyline, his jaw tight. Not yet. But later that night, as he stood in his penthouse staring at the unopened bottle of scotch he used to celebrate every win, he realized something. He didn't want Georgia to fall for Stanton Technologies or his name in the papers. He wanted her to fall for the man who read bedtime stories to strangers' kids, who sat quietly beneath stars with a woman who didn't ask for anything but honesty. And for that to happen, he'd have to do something he hadn't done in years. Let her see the real him. All of him. Even the parts he kept hidden behind tailored suits and polished words. Especially those Rain streaked across the windows of the black SUV as Isaiah leaned forward in his seat, his phone silent in his hand. For the third time that week, Georgia hadn't answered his call. He wasn't the kind of man who sat around waiting. He made decisions, closed billion-dollar deals, took risks that others wouldn't dare breathe near. But the unread message sitting beneath her name on his screen made him hesitate in a way no merger or acquisition ever had. "Boss?" his driver asked from the front seat. "We're outside." Isaiah looked up. Georgia's building loomed gray and quiet against the wet sky. He hadn't planned to stop by unannounced, but after 3 days of silence, he couldn't stand waiting anymore. He stepped out, rain misting his shoulders as he jogged up the slick steps. The light in her apartment window was on. That was something. When she opened the door, her expression wasn't surprised. It was tired. "I didn't think you'd come," she said, holding the door open just wide enough for him to see her, not quite enough to invite him in. "You didn't answer," Isaiah said. "I waited." She gave a small nod, her eyes unfocused. "I know." He took a breath. "Georgia, what's going on?" "I got a call from the bank," she said, folding her arms. "They're pulling funding from the after-school program we started last year. The one I've been volunteering at every Tuesday." He blinked. "I didn't know you'd started a program." "I don't talk about it much," she said. "It's just a reading group, some art supplies, a safe place for the kids whose parents work late. We meet at the rec center by the train tracks." He stepped closer. "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked down at her bare feet. "Because I didn't want you to fix it." "I wasn't offering to fix it," he said. "I'm asking why you didn't want help." "Because," she said, voice rising slightly, "if I let you help, then it stops being mine. It becomes another Stanton initiative. Another press release." Isaiah's jaw clenched. "You really think that's all I am? A headline? I think you're used to being the solution. And I'm used to being the one who has to figure it out without anyone else." He didn't have a response for that. Not right away. "Let me in," he said quietly. "Please." She hesitated, then stepped back. He walked into the apartment slowly, the scent of vanilla and something warm lingering in the air. Children's drawings covered a corkboard near the kitchen, and a stack of worn paperbacks sat on the coffee table. He turned to her. "I didn't come here to throw money at something. I came because I haven't stopped thinking about you for 3 days, and I couldn't stand not knowing why you pulled away." She closed the door behind him and leaned against it. "I pulled away because I'm scared." "Of me? Of what you represent," she said. "Of what it would mean to fall for someone who lives in a world I've never even stepped into." He stepped in front of her. "You already stepped into it. And you didn't flinch." She shook her head. "That observatory wasn't a date. It was a fairy tale. And I don't know how to live in a fairy tale, Isaiah. I don't have the right shoes for it." He reached out, brushing his fingers against hers. "Then I'll walk barefoot with you." Her eyes met his, wide and uncertain. "I'm not offering you a press release," he said. "I'm offering you me. Not the company. Not the bank accounts. Just the man who read with sock puppets and forgot how to breathe when you laughed. I don't know if that's enough," she whispered. "Not because of you. Because of me." He let his hand fall. "Then let me prove that it is." She didn't answer. He left when the rain had slowed to a drizzle, his chest heavier than when he arrived. That night he didn't sleep. Instead, he stayed in his office at Stanton Tower, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling windows and silence. The city glittered below, but nothing looked bright. By dawn, he made a decision. At exactly 7:30 that morning, he walked into the Stanton Foundation's central office and called an emergency board meeting. "I want to establish a new fund," he said once the execs were seated. "Nonprofit grassroots education support, focused exclusively on community-led programs." His CFO raised an eyebrow. "We already have 3 education initiatives. This one will be different," Isaiah said. No branding. No press. Anonymous support only. And I'll personally manage the disbursements. That's not standard protocol. It is now. He spent the rest of the day reviewing community rec centers, pulling reports, and calling directors. By mid-afternoon, he'd located the one Georgia had mentioned and spoken directly with the manager, a woman named Tanya who nearly cried when he promised the full year's budget would be covered by a private donor. No strings? Tanya asked. None, Isaiah said. Just keep the doors open. He didn't tell Georgia that night. Or the next. He wanted her to come to him not as someone who owed him anything, but because she wanted to. It wasn't until 3 days later that she appeared at his office. His assistant buzzed him. There's a woman here, Georgia Jameson. She doesn't have an appointment, but send her in. She stepped through the glass doors, her hair damp from the wind, cheeks flushed. She didn't sit. She didn't wait for him to speak. You paid for the program. He stood slowly. How did you find out? Tanya told me. She said it was anonymous, but I asked to see the transfer details. The routing number led to a private Stanton account. I didn't want you to feel like you owed me anything. That's exactly how I felt, she said, voice shaking. Until I realized you did it without needing credit. Without needing me to know. And I don't know what to do with that. Try saying thank you, he said softly. She stepped closer. Thank you? He nodded. You're welcome. I still don't know if I can be part of your world. Then let me build one we can both live in. She stared at him, her eyes unreadable. You don't even know what I look like in the morning? Then stay tonight. Let me find out. A slow breath escaped her lips. You don't play fair. I don't play games, he said. Not with you. She studied him for a long moment. You're serious about me. I've never been more serious about anything. She finally sat down across from him, her hands clasped together. Then we need to talk. About what this is. What it could be. He nodded. Good. Because I'm not going anywhere. And outside, the rain started again, not loud or angry, but soft and steady. Like the beginning of something that might finally last. The first time Georgia stayed the night, she fell asleep curled up on Isaiah's couch, her head resting on a pillow she'd dragged from the armchair. He'd offered her the bed, but she waved him off with a quiet, "You have too much thread count for me. I'd never wake up." He didn't argue. Instead, he brought her a blanket without a word and sat across from her, watching her drift off with the kind of stillness he hadn't felt in years. The city blinked outside the windows, but inside, everything was calm. By morning, she was gone. A note sat on the counter beside a half-empty mug of tea. I'm not running. Just needed air. See you tonight? She did come back. Not just that night, but the next. And the one after that. Eventually, she brought a toothbrush. Then socks. One afternoon, she arrived with a bag of groceries and cooked scrambled eggs in his kitchen like it was the most natural thing in the world. He didn't stop her. He didn't want to. But even as their lives began to blend, his suits hanging beside her oversized cardigans, her library tote leaning against his leather briefcase, Isaiah couldn't shake the sense that something was off balance. Not between them, but around them. He hadn't told her about the investor gala. Not yet. And it wasn't because he didn't want her there. It was because he wasn't sure if she'd come. She hated those kinds of things, rooms full of people who measured worth in square footage and last names. But the gala wasn't optional. His name was on the invitation, and the press would be watching. He waited until they were eating dinner on the rooftop, a quiet meal of roasted vegetables and grilled salmon Georgia had made while humming a tune he didn't recognize. There's an event coming up, he said, resting his fork against the edge of the plate. She glanced up. What kind of event? A formal one. Black tie. Investors, executives, board members. The sort of thing I usually endure instead of enjoy. She sipped her water slowly. And you want me to come? I do. Her fingers traced the edge of her napkin. You know I don't fit into that world. You don't have to fit. You just have to be there. I don't own anything formal. You will. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Isaiah. I'm not dressing you like an accessory, he said. I'm offering to take care of something that doesn't matter, so you can focus on what does. She held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. Okay. One night. But if anyone starts talking about hedge funds, I'm hiding under the table. He smiled. I'll join you. The following afternoon, he cleared his schedule and took her to a boutique that didn't advertise and only opened by appointment. The owner, a quiet woman with silver hair and an eye for detail, brought out a few options while Georgia fidgeted on the velvet love seat. I feel like I'm about to get drafted into a royal wedding, she muttered. Isaiah leaned down. Only if you want to be queen. She rolled her eyes but didn't move when the tailor asked her to stand. He watched her closely as she tried on a deep blue gown with a graceful neckline and barely their sleeves. When she stepped out of the dressing room, her posture stiff, he stood and crossed the room. She looked at him warily. Too much? He shook his head once. You look like a storm in silk. She blinked. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. She looked down at herself, then back up. I don't want to be a project. You're not. I don't want to be something you show off. You're not that either. Then what am I? He reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. You're the reason I finally want someone to see me. The night of the gala arrived with tension in the air. They rode to the venue in silence, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had weight. George's hand was cold in his. He didn't let go. The ballroom shimmered with light gold chandeliers, polished floors, and music that floated like perfume. People turned as they entered, some recognizing Isaiah instantly, others eyeing Georgia with quiet curiosity. She stood tall beside him, her expression unreadable. You can still leave, he whispered. I'm not going anywhere. He spent the first hour introducing her to business partners and board members. She shook hands, nodded politely, and sipped a glass of sparkling water. But he could feel the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes scanned each face like she was waiting for someone to call her out for not belonging. When his former advisor, a man named Malcolm Wren, approached with a glass of scotch and a practiced smile, Isaiah braced. So this is the librarian, Malcolm said, looking Georgia over like she was a stock report. Interesting choice. Georgia's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. Isaiah took a step forward. This is Georgia Jameson. She runs one of the most impactful reading programs on the East Side and rebuilt a children's community center with nothing but duct tape and determination. She's also the reason I've stopped thinking the market is the most important thing in the world. Malcolm blinked. Well then. A toast to unexpected investments. Georgia lifted her glass slightly, then turned away. Later, on the balcony overlooking the city, she leaned against the railing, her back to the crowd. I don't belong here, she said. Isaiah stood beside her. Neither do I. You're the reason half those people are inside. I'm the reason they're here, but not the reason they stay. They stay for power. For image. For the idea of what success looks like. And what does it look like to you? He watched her, her hair catching the soft breeze, her profile lit by the glow of the city. It looks like you standing here, telling me the truth when everyone else is selling lies. She turned to face him. I can't promise I'll always be comfortable in this world. Or that people will stop judging me for not being born into it. I don't need you to be comfortable. I just need you with me. Her lips parted slightly. Do you mean that? Instead of answering, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. He didn't open it. He just held it between them. I bought this 2 days after I met you. Didn't know what to do with it until now. Her breath caught. I'm not asking you to marry me tonight, he said. I'm asking you to think about what your life would look like if we did this together. All of it. The messy, loud, beautiful parts. She took the box from his hand, opened it slowly. Inside was a ring unlike anything she'd imagined, simple, elegant, and unexpectedly hers. "I don't care if we get married in a courthouse or a bookstore," he said. "I just wanted to be with you." She closed the box gently and looked up at him. "Then I guess we better find a date." The kiss that followed wasn't dramatic or showy. It was quiet. Certain. The kind that didn't need an audience or applause. 3 months later, they stood in a small garden behind the library, surrounded by kids waving handmade signs and volunteers holding wildflowers. Georgia wore a pale blue dress, and Isaiah wore no tie for the first time in his adult life. The vows were short. The laughter was loud. And when they danced under string lights and open sky, he whispered in her ear, "You stole my heart in 5 minutes. The rest of my life is yours." She smiled against his chest. "Told you I was chaos." And he held her tighter, knowing he'd never wanted peace so badly in his entire life. Georgia's fingers trembled as she adjusted the tiny bouquet of wildflowers tucked into her hair. The garden behind the library had been transformed with rows of string lights and hand-painted signs from the kids she read to every week. Someone had even dragged out a rickety upright piano from the community center and decorated it with ivy and fairy lights. The keys were uneven, but the sound was honest. She stood just behind the trellis, hidden from view, her dress brushing the grass beneath her feet. From the other side, she could hear the hum of voices, neighbors, volunteers, a few of Isaiah's board members who had shown up in designer shoes and looked slightly confused by the folding chairs and paper lanterns. Ella, the head librarian and the closest thing Georgia had to a mentor, touched her elbow gently. "You ready?" Georgia looked down the path of white petals and saw Isaiah standing there under the arch, his hands clasped in front of him, wearing a slate-gray suit that didn't try too hard. His eyes were on the horizon, but his expression was calm, like he already knew what mattered. "I've never been more sure of anything," she whispered. The music started soft, slightly off-key, and completely perfect. When she stepped out, everything stilled. Isaiah turned to look at her, and something in his face shifted. Not surprise, not awe, something quieter. Recognition. Like he'd been waiting for years to see her exactly like this. As she reached him, he reached out and took her hand, his thumb brushing the inside of her wrist as if to ground them both. The officiant, a retired judge who had once borrowed 20 children's books and returned them all 2 weeks late, cleared his throat and began. But Georgia barely heard the words. Her ears were full of wind and the soft rustle of leaves. When it came time for vows, she didn't read from a paper. "I used to think love was a quiet thing," she said, her voice steady. "Something that slipped in when you weren't looking. But you didn't slip in. You crashed through. And somehow, instead of breaking everything, you made room. For me. For all the pieces I didn't know were still worth keeping. I don't need magic. I just need this. You. Every day." Isaiah's jaw clenched, but he didn't look away. He didn't read from a paper either. "I've built empires," he said softly. "I've closed deals that changed industries. But nothing has ever felt as real as standing here with you. You're not an escape from my world. You're the reason I want to stay in it. You made me stop looking for what's next. Because now, I want to stay right here." There were no dramatic pauses, no staged tears. Just promises. When the judge pronounced them married, Georgia didn't wait. She stepped into him and kissed him like they were the only two people in the world who knew what love really looked like. Later, after the laughter and cake and offbeat dancing under the stars, they slipped away from the crowd and walked down the narrow alley behind the library. The air smelled like summer and honeysuckle, and somewhere in the distance, a car horn honked. Georgia kicked off her shoes and leaned against the cool brick wall, watching Isaiah take off his jacket and toss it over his shoulder. "Think your board members survived the potluck? They'll live," he said. "They even tried the baked macaroni. Risky." He stepped closer. "Can I ask you something?" She tilted her head. You already married me. Isn't that cheating? He ignored that. Do you want to come with me next week? To Geneva. There's a non-profit summit. I'm speaking at it. Her eyebrows lifted. Switzerland? Yes. Do they serve grilled cheese? I'll make sure they do. She tapped her foot. I'd have to get someone to cover my story times. I already asked Ella. She said she'd do it. Georgia blinked. You planned this? He shrugged. I hoped. She smiled slowly. Then I guess I'd better find a passport. That night, back in the penthouse, still unfamiliar in some corners but already filled with little signs of her, Georgia stood on the balcony, arms wrapped around herself. Isaiah joined her, barefoot, 2 mugs of cinnamon tea in his hands. You really think this can work? She asked. I don't think, he said, handing her a mug. I know. I've never had this before. Neither have I. She leaned against him, and he wrapped an arm around her waist. They stood like that for a long time, watching the city pulse below. Months passed. They traveled to Geneva, then Lisbon, then a small village in Ireland where Georgia insisted on reading to a group of schoolchildren in a one-room library. Isaiah watched her from the back, wondering if his heart would ever stop expanding. She started a foundation of her own, small, focused on literacy programs for underserved areas. She used funds from silent benefactors, but never let the work become about names. It was always about the kids. The stories. The voices that needed to be heard. Isaiah cut back on deals. He still ran Stanton Technologies, but he no longer felt the need to be everywhere at once. He focused on impact, not scale. On purpose, not performance. They fought, sometimes. About little things, who left the cabinet open, who forgot to buy milk. But every argument ended with honesty. With soft apologies and quiet laughter. With the understanding that love wasn't perfect, but it was always worth fighting for. One spring morning, Georgia sat on the library's front steps, a clipboard in her lap and paint on her jeans. Isaiah pulled up in a vintage blue convertible he bought from a farm auction just for the hell of it. She looked up, blinking against the sun. What's that? A mistake I planned to enjoy. He got out and opened the passenger door. She set the clipboard aside. Where are we going? He grinned. There's a bookstore 3 hours upstate. They're closing down. Thought we'd go buy everything. She laughed, standing. You're serious? I want to turn the guest room into a library. She crossed the gravel path, her smile spreading. You mean my library? Our library. She got in the car, brushing hair from her face as the engine purred to life. As they drove, the wind pulling at them, Georgia glanced sideways. You know, I never planned for any of this. I did, Isaiah said. The moment you called me chaos. She reached for his hand on the gearshift. You still think I'm chaos? He brought her hand to his lips. You're my favorite kind. And as the road stretched ahead, framed by green hills and open sky, they drove toward a life they hadn't planned but had chosen deliberately, fearlessly, together. With every turn of the wheels, they built something not out of fairy tales, but truth. And it was everything they never knew they needed.